Thanks for joining us on a special edition of The Pulse, a heavy 24 hours of news. I'm Ruparaj. The horror of the last day is impossible to put into words. And the question on everyone's mind is why? Why did a gunman plow into a church, a place everyone should feel safe, start shooting? Why did he then set the building on fire? And while authorities work to find answers to those questions, families are left mourning, reeling, and in shock. All the lives lost. They're also taking time to care for survivors. Tonight, we're taking politics out of the conversation. A church security expert with firsthand knowledge of not only this building, but houses of worship in the area, telling us what happened here and how other facilities can keep parishioners safe. Former FBI Special Agent in Charge Andy Arena with how this investigation could play out with the feds now in charge of it, and clinical psychologist Dr. Rose Moten with how we can all cope with tragedies like this and we can help our children as well. And a police chief from Bloomfield Township who is doing whatever he can to help other investigators at the scene. But right now, we want to get you up to speed on everything we know about this tragedy so far. You know, one of the biggest things we've learned today is that all people are accounted for. If there's any glimmer of good news in this, there it is. So the death toll currently stands at 4. That's the terrible news. 2 people shot to death and 2 people who were found in the church and likely died in the fire. 8 other people were hurt. 1 person is still in critical condition. A second is critical but stable, and the rest are in stable condition. The gunman, Thomas Sanford, whose name we won't be saying much more after today, was shot and killed by police. Today we learned investigators found 4 improvised explosive devices in the 40-year-old's truck. We also know gasoline was used in the fire to burn the church. But in the midst of the horror, heroics by police. They got there on the scene within just 30 seconds, and took down the gunman within 8 minutes. We also learned from a man who met the gunman while campaigning for office that the gunman made derogatory comments about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Today, several leaders from law enforcement to elected officials spoke about this tragedy. The FBI reiterating they are investigating this as targeted violence.
There is no place in our society for this. There's absolutely no place. But it's become all too common. And as we know, we have become more and more desensitized. This community is hurting, and we are here to help them heal.
You prepare in peace to perform in chaos. I saw it live. I saw what you trained for, what you planned for, and then reality hit yesterday morning on a bright sunny day when people went to worship. But what I also saw is every level of government law enforcement work together for the good of the people. What I witnessed was people putting their lives at risk that had 2 months on the job as an EMT, or brand new firefighters, veteran firefighters, and law enforcement, just to bring a sense of stability to a scene that was chaotic and dynamic.
In the midst of such tragedy, it's hard to talk about praise, but these are the men and women in law enforcement who are firefighters and police who we should be giving so much credit to for helping as they did. We also, though, heard from a man who survived the attack. Brian Taylor says the gunman shot at his family's car as he was trying to drive away. He was hit in the hand by shrapnel and told us what went through his mind when all of this was happening.
We were getting ready to take the sacrament, and we heard a large, just a loud bang. And then we saw that the front wall, so the front part of the chapel, the wall was cracked. And so we at first figured somebody accidentally had done something. So we started rushing out to go help. And then as soon as I saw the American flags on the truck, and that it was on purpose, and somebody yelled that it was on purpose, I started trying to get people out of the area and away, to disperse away. None of us recognized this guy. He came in with camel pants and an assault rifle, and confusion and just sad.
Our coverage does continue tonight with former FBI Special Agent in Charge Andy Arena. He joins us via Zoom to talk about how this investigation could play out. And Andy, it's always good to see you. I'm sorry that we're talking under these circumstances, but thank you for joining us here today. I want to begin by asking you the question that so many of us who are on the ground in the last 48 hours, or 24 hours rather, have been asking, which is, we're not hearing much about what could possibly be a motive in this. I know the feds are in charge of this investigation right now. Kind of lift the curtain for us and give us an idea as to what they could be doing as we speak.
Well, I think it was described as a targeted act of violence, and I think that's a pretty fair description. The guy came there with weapons, with IEDs, in a plan to do bad things. So, right now, I think that the FBI and the other law enforcement agencies, they're looking under rock, interviewing witnesses, interviewing family, neighbors, anybody. This guy, obviously, a big piece is going to be the online footprint. Who was he in communication? What was he looking? What was he posting? So I think it's going to take a couple of days to really, and obviously there's some information that's coming out. You were reporting earlier, but I just caution people, as the state police said, let's give it a little time and see what comes out.
You do talk about this online piece that I think is important to have a conversation about. In the last 3 or 4 shootings, that online footprint has been reported on heavily. Social media, gaming, all kinds of things in past cases. In this case, when you talk about that digital forensic look, what likely are they looking at right now?
Well, Rupe, you're right. Look at almost every one of these mass shootings, right? The red flags were there, right? The activity online. So I think it's going to be, what was he posting? What was he talking to? And what was he searching? What was he looking at, right? This guy made these IEDs. What was he looking at that would kind of lead us to solidify the motive? So they're really going to be kind of pouring through his computers, his laptops, his iPhone, to see really what this guy was all about.
I do want to talk to you a little bit about the way in which this attack was carried out. You talk about, I just said this on the air the other day, I said, it's one thing to shoot at people as they're in the most vulnerable places, they're praying. It's another thing to set a place of worship on fire, and it's another thing to ram your truck. All 3 of these, this seemed to be very well planned in terms of this person going after every vulnerability possible.
Yeah, Rupe, you're exactly right. This guy put a lot of thought and effort into planning this, right? And that's the deal with the bad guys. They're always trying to defeat what we're doing, right? We have to try to stay one step ahead of them, and it's difficult, right? I mean, obviously there's going to be some mental health issues here, and really trying to put yourself in this guy's mind. It's going to be really difficult. But yeah, trying to stay one step ahead of these guys is certainly a very difficult proposition for law enforcement.
You think a little bit about what this person may have done in the past, what he must have said in the past. Talk for a moment about that investigation. You talked about how they're likely poring over the social media, but they're also talking to family members and friends. And then that brings the question about how we should all be communicating with our family and friends. How do you know when someone is in a place where they start becoming radicalized, if that's what happened here?
Yeah, and I was talking to my daughters about this over the weekend. All of these shootings, it's not just political or religious or whatever. It's extremists, right? Extremists using that platform to kind of push forward their views. So they're going to be looking all the way back to early days, right? They're going to be looking at this guy growing up, his time in the military, in the United States Marine Corps, here. They're really going to be looking hard at what caused this guy to make these decisions, right? So you're right. It's going to go all the way back to his time in school, military, his family, his friends, his neighbors. It's going to take a few days to kind of piece this together.
When you see people who have any kind of paraphernalia around them in their home, on their trucks, on their cars, how closely are investigators looking at that? What is on his truck? I know there was 2 flags. There was some explosives found in the truck. Other signs like that.
So what does that link? Right? What was this, a political, religious? What was the statement? And was there something on those flags? Right? What is the significance? It's going to take, as I said, a couple of days to piece that together. But you mentioned earlier, about the family and friends, and when we see these things, we don't want to draw attention. We don't want to be critical. Those added say something. I'm sure people out there right now that are kind of second guessing themselves for not saying something.
Yeah, and by no means do we mean that anyone who has bumper stickers or paraphernalia or flags should be thought of in any nefarious light or dubious light. Certainly, this is something that investigators are looking at, putting an entire picture together, and these crumbs are being put together as we speak. Andy Arena, I want to thank you for joining us here on The Pulse. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Rupe.
We're keeping this conversation going after the break. Bloomfield Township Police Chief James Gallagher was actually helping some of the other investigators at the scene just this weekend. And security expert Mike Harville, who has some advice for all places of worship. What should they do in the wake of this tragedy? And later, we're going to be talking to a mental health therapist about signs that we should all look out for when we spot trouble. You're watching a special edition of The Pulse. We'll be right back. Thanks for staying with us on this special edition of The Pulse as we cover the tragedy in Grand Blanc Township. Joining us now with a couple of different security perspectives, Bloomfield Township Police Chief James Gallagher and Mike Harville. He's the security coordinator at Kensington Church, and he's the founder of Security Leaders Coalition, which helps safeguard churches and places of worship all across the board, all across our area. And it's good to see you both. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse.
Sure.
Chief, I saw you yesterday right outside the church, and that's where I invited you on this show. You were helping assist in any way you could, as so many departments are, this Grand Blanc Township Police Department. I want to just kind of ask you, when you look at the situation of what we know so far, in your investigative mind, what goes through it?
Initially, the same thing as the response, right? Is from an outside agency assisting Grand Blanc Township. And again, I got there late. I don't want to sound like I was one of the first responders there. Part of the sheriff will talk about our OCTAC response, Oakland Tackle Consortium. We kind of just lend our hand wherever we can. And so that's the first thing we think of is, do they have enough resources to respond to the incident? And then the build out from there. An agency like Grand Blanc Township is very similar to Bloomfield Township, just one is in Genesee and one in Oakland. And making sure we have enough manpower, whether it's investigations, obviously victims, and the hopefully the reunification, if we can, of the families. And
that was a big piece, wasn't it? I mean, because at this time on Sunday, we were talking about whether there were still people who may have been trapped inside the church. The good news, as we reported at the top of the show, is that that's not the case. However, what is, kind of lift the curtain for us, what is happening right now as the feds take over this investigation and look at maybe motive and also the why, right?
Yeah, I think it's that collaboration amongst everybody, right? You saw last night the ATF agents, the MSP, bomb dogs, Oakland County Sheriff's Department, Genesee County, assisting Grand Blanc in all of that. And everyone's just trying to figure out what happened. But there's so many different angles you have to look at, and it's manpower heavy, whether you have to identify where the suspect lives. And so all of that has to happen pretty quick. While the fire department, listen, fire was used as a weapon here, which is not very common. And so that from a law enforcement perspective, that really puts a challenge on us when we're usually typically the first ones on scene.
If it was just a shooting, it would be one thing, but you're talking about a fire and a shooting, which complicates even the aftermath.
It makes it very difficult. Yeah. It changes the whole landscape of it. And what's really stood out even yesterday is that when we respond to these situations now, we're watching firemen and firewomen put in bulletproof vests to go into these situations, which when I started 25 years ago, that was not the case.
Mike, I want to talk to you a little bit about what's being done to protect places of worship. When you see what happened here, plans of action, how important is that? And I know that you can't speak and speculate about what may or may not have happened here, but in general, what is this a reminder for all of us to keep in mind when it comes to our places of worship?
Well, you're right. To start, you need to have a plan. Training is very critical. You need to practice that plan. Everybody, church staff, any volunteers that work in the church, everybody needs to know the plan, and everybody needs to practice the plan.
It's like a drill, like you would at school.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's basically a good way of making sure people can stay safe, is if you have people that know what to do when something happens.
As soon as this happened, I heard so many people, loved ones included, who said, I'm a little bit afraid to go back into a place of worship because of this kind of a thing, copycat acts, other things like that. But Mike, you've always said, and I know, Chief, you agree with this, and I believe this too, we will not stop because someone wants to take away our freedoms. What do you tell people who are afraid? Come up with a plan? Is that the best thing to do?
Have a plan, but because of what I do, I'm a very big proponent of church security. I think it's important that every church have some type of a security set up. Even the smallest of churches can do something.
What could have been done, for instance, in this situation when someone rams their truck up against to disrupt, right, to scare people, to spook people, and then that attracts people outside, and now the guy starts shooting? There were so many levels here.
Oh, absolutely. Lots of levels. In fact, as the chief said, talking about the fire, that brings a whole new dynamic into this whole thing, because we've never even considered the idea of fire as a weapon. And now I'm sure there's probably going to be copycats out there that'll use the same idea. And so we now need to start training and practicing for what to do if somebody uses a fire as a weapon. But in this particular situation, when he rams his car into the building, or his truck into the building, and people come out and he gets out shooting, that's where it's really good to have an armed security team. Because I know a lot of churches don't want guns in their building, but it's a proven fact. What stops a gun is another gun.
You believe that is a very good preventative tool to have, and it should be known that that person is there, yes?
I think, yes. I think it is good that they be known. I know a lot of churches want to hide their security team, keep them incognito, but I'm on my perspective is deterrence. And I want to make sure that if somebody comes to my church, they know we've got coverage there. And it's not going to be, we're not an easy target.
Chief, what would you do if you were doing a training at a church or a temple or a mosque or a synagogue, wherever, right now, and they asked you, hey, Chief, I'm concerned because of the levels of crime that happened in this case, the truck ramming, the fire, and the shooting. What can you do if you're inside that place of worship if that happens?
Well, we teach everybody when we're doing our training with the schools, whether it's an Alice drill or run, hide, fight, that those are everyday tools as well. And so we also talk about soft targets, as Mike was saying, and having security. A lot of our churches hire our police department on weekends to provide security. We encourage some of our officers, if they choose, to go to masses in uniform, if they can. And again, that's a big deterrent when you know somebody in there. And I'll tell you what, there's heroes. While this is a tragedy, we know there's going to be some stories of heroic acts yesterday. If I'm not mistaken, they neutralized this shooter very, very quickly.
It was a DNR officer and another officer who made sure that happened. Last word to you, Mike, in terms of the heroism that we know happened inside of that church. We know that there were people who covered children to make sure that they were okay. You always make sure that you have you're taking care of yourself in order to take care of others. But in a split second, we all should be ready to act. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. And there's lots of things people can be doing and should be doing. Chief mentioned Alice training, but any kind of active shooter training that people can take, CPR, stop the bleed, those are things that everybody needs to know, especially when it comes to stop the bleed.
What's the website for Security Leaders Coalition?
SecurityLeadersCoalition.org.
Very easy. If someone is interested in perhaps getting some of this training into their place of worship, perhaps they can contact you. Obviously, talk to your local police department as well if you're concerned.
We offer that training.
You do as well.
Yes, correct.
Chief Gallagher of Bloomfield Township, Mike Harville, good to see you both. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse.
Thank you.
Well, turning now to clinical psychologist Dr. Rose Moten after the break, how you can process this tragedy and help your kids as well, and warning signs to look out for people who are troubled. You're watching a special edition of The Pulse. Thanks for staying up with us on this special edition of The Pulse. If you're streaming us, thank you for doing that as well. Looking at the attack in Grand Blanc Township, here with some advice about how we can process this tragedy and help our whole families process it. Clinical psychologist Dr. Rose Moten. And Dr. Moten, you're consulted across the country now for your advice, and for good reason. You come at it not from a prescriptive, medicinal way, but you come from a compassionate way. I want to begin by asking you a little bit about the person who did this. We don't know, as investigators try to piece this together, why, but we do know some of what he felt, which was apparently some anger towards people who are of this faith, specifically Mormons. Talk for a moment about what we can look out for when it comes to our community members who may be on the brink of losing it.
Yeah, that was one of the things when I was watching the coverage yesterday. One of the experts said something that I totally agree with, that, he did not just commit this crime and no one knew he was kind of going off the rails. Like someone heard something, saw something, noticed something, but just did not report it. And that's one of the things as a community we have to become more vigilant with.
It becomes hard, though, Dr.
Yeah.
Moten, because we know that things like that seem to kind of evolve. People are a little irritated, then they become a little angrier, then they become perhaps radicalized.
Yeah.
At what point on that spectrum do you decide to intervene?
And it's not for us to decide it's this serious now, because we don't know. We don't know at what point even on this spectrum that he decided to do it. It could have been a month ago that he started to get these very extremist just ideals. But, you know, it's not, you know, if you're not an expert in law enforcement or in mental health, don't even try to figure out, should I or should I not?
But is it a gut that you feel?
Perhaps it could be a gut, but you know, I think we all have a duty to protect the public. And it's so much better to be off than to wake up one morning and see this tragedy and say, you know, I suspected something with this individual, or, you know, I noticed that he was becoming more extremist with his views. We live in a time also, Rube, I was thinking about this yesterday because, you know, we're having too many of these conversations now, right?
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about even the role that the social media plays, because anything we believe in is going to be exacerbated by our algorithm. So for many extremists, when they start having these ideals or beliefs as just out the window as these beliefs can be, I was going to say crazy, you know, but that's not a clinical term, but
Sure.
we use that word, right? But as out the window of these beliefs may be, they are validated with
By
the
other
algorithms
people.
by other people.
And
yeah.
I think there's a responsibility, and I'll say it, my opinion. I believe that these big tech companies have a social responsibility to check those algorithms, because when someone is saying something that is, by the way, legal, but radicalized, hateful, and it's being fueled by other people. Could you imagine going to a restaurant or bar and having two people stand up and start screaming something that seems a little bit out of sorts? And then if they were joined by 50 other people, they would just feel like, hey, what I feel is normal.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen in real life. The social media, that's our responsibility. So if we see people spending too much time on it, we can also talk to them about that.
We can talk to them about that, but you know, who knows? You know, we don't know all the details. We don't know if his family recognizes or if he was having these discussions with his family about his beliefs. But again, it's up to us. Just as mental health therapists, we have a duty to warn, and that's if a person is potentially a harm to themselves or harm to others. But I think that has to be extended to the community just as a social responsibility for all of us.
How do we cope with this as community members, not just people who are in Grand Blanc Township, but across the state?
Yeah, we have to talk about it. We have to talk about it. We know, I was talking to the officer, the chief of police earlier, and he was talking about how there were critical incident stress debriefers, you know, on site. And we know how important that is to have individuals after something so horrific happens that are trained in trauma, you know, healing and trauma processing, to be on the scenes as soon as possible, because it does several things. It lessens the likelihood that it's going to have extreme, you know, mental health consequences for those who were involved, the parishioners, and even the community. But it also, hopefully, individuals who may have been going down this path of extremism are able to, you know, be identified or recognized, the result of this, and really start to check their own, you know, behavior.
Check on each other, talk about it, have conversations, even if they're uncomfortable. All great advice. Dr. Rose Moten, thank you for your time today. Every word you said is valuable to someone on the other side of that camera. Thank you. It's been a tough few days here in our state, in our country. And with that, that is the Pulse for tonight. Thank you for joining us. I'm Rup Raj. On this night, we end the show by saying, from all of us at Fox 2, we wish you peace.